Okay, let's get started. Good morning. I'm Erhan Ararat. I'm the director of Residency Match Mentorship Program at White Tulip Health Foundation. So I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our webinar today for medical students and medical graduates. So as White Tulip, part of White Tulip, we provide mentorship and guidance through this difficult process with the residency match. And today we are going to focus the initial part of our match process, which is from now until the submission of the applications. So first of all, I would like to thank a few people here. First of all, our panelists who take their time today to join this webinar, and they are willing to share their experiences and their opinions. So thank you very much. And secondly, our residency match mentorship team did a fabulous job in organizing this event and put a lot of effort. And finally, our IT department and our online platform at White Tulip Health Foundation helped with the technical part of this webinar. So thank you very much. So I would like to talk about the logistics of this webinar before we start. So I will be asking questions to the panelists, each panelist, one question at a time, and I will be rotating between the panelists without certain order. And if other panelist has something to say about the question to ask to the other person, all of you are welcome to comment. We are gonna try to finish the initial part of the webinar, the question part, to the panelists around 12:10. And afterwards, we are going to start taking questions. And we will try to finish the program by 12:30. And if you have a question, and I hope you will have a lot of questions, you can put that into the chat box in YouTube, and we will try to cover them as much as we possibly can. So I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in YouTube in the link that you got on the flyer. So to start, to my introduction of our panelists, so briefly, we have Dr. Charles Kawan, who is a pediatric nephrologist and program director, residency program director at Cleveland Clinic Foundation. Dr. Kawan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and we have Dr. Hassan Khan, who is currently a chief resident in internal medicine at the University at Buffalo. So Dr. Khan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have our other panelist, Dr. Arthur Lima from Allegheny Health Network. And he's currently a neurology resident and will be a chief resident next month. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And our last panelist is not able to join us at this point. I'm not able to reach, so we'll just move forward without our fourth panelist. Or if Dr. Ali Kawam is able to join us later, then we can get Dr. Kawam involved. Okay, so to start off, my first question will come to Dr. Actually, any of you. This was primarily for Dr. Ali Kawam, but I would like to get your opinion on the volunteer activities while entering the residency or even choosing a residency and building a career. So can you please comment on the importance of volunteer activities? Does anyone want to comment?
Like Dr. Kawama has joined.
Oh, she
Yeah,
just,
right here.
okay.
Hi.
All right. Great. Okay. Welcome. So let me see. So I'm able to hear you, and okay, I'm able to see you. So thanks for joining us today. So my first question was to you. What is the importance of volunteer activities while entering residency and building a career?
To me, Alette?
Yes.
All
Yes.
right, cool. All right. So I think as far as like volunteer activities go, I think the most important thing is to make sure that it's something important to you. So that way, if you get an interview, it's something you can talk about. It's not just like something that you just did to put on your resume. And a lot of people disregard the fact that, you know, volunteer work is really helpful to put on your resume, but it's also more helpful if you can basically use it to your advantage and kind of show the interviewer that you're interested about something else. Like it's kind of like showing a different side of you. It's not an end all. As far as a career, I think same thing. It's the idea that it's something more meaningful to you rather than just something that you can put on your resume.
Right. It can be a good starting point, especially like while you are looking for options, and it can really inspire you. So, okay.
I just want to add one comment. I think volunteering in things other than medicine can also be helpful. So for example, in today's atmosphere, if you're like a civil rights, racial justice type person, that could be something that shows a different side of you and that actually shows that you have something else to offer or a different perspective.
Right, that's very true. Okay, so the next question is going to come to Dr. Lima, and it's gonna be about, well, we have a cat over there. So.
We do.
So this question is gonna be about personal statements. So we know it can be really difficult to write a personal statement, and it takes time, and it is, and sometimes we don't know what to put, and we don't know where to start with. So what would you advise to our listeners?
So I think, as the name says, the personal statement needs to be personal. So everybody tries to put the same. Sometimes when people are trying to write their personal statements, they come up with these websites or services that kind of give you a few tips, but you have to put a little bit of yourself into them. What I would say when I was doing mine is think about a few of the experiences that you had during your medical school or medical career or in your life, things that drove you into choosing what you want to do, and basically try to put that into your personal statement. Tell them a story, tell them an experience that you had. If you're going to use one of the services that help you do personal statements, I would say some people write the personal statement first and have somebody review. Some people use services to do the personal statement for them from the scratch. But I think it's important that you review it and try to put as much of your personality and your experiences into it, especially because during the interviews, you might be asked about your personal statement. So you have to be able to tell them about those stories that you wrote about, and explain to people something you put in your personal statement or what you meant by that. So I would say it's nice, just in summary, it's nice if you can tell some story about you or some experience that you had during your medical career, and maybe tell them the reason why you got there, and or people or things that helped you get there.
Yes. Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So I've been a program director for over 7 years, and so I've read hundreds and hundreds of personal statements. And over time, we joke because there are certain kind of templates for personal statements. They are personal illness, family illness, meaningful patient, significant mentor. You know, these are kind of classic approaches that people have. And although it is common, don't be dissuaded by the common. The most important thing about a personal statement is that it is genuine. Okay, and so if you went through a personal illness that has inspired you to enter medicine, then that is your story, and that is a story you should share. Don't worry about how it's going to be viewed. Is it special? All those kinds of things. All you want to be is genuine and write about yourself. The other piece to keep in mind is that the personal statement is the only opportunity in your written application to explain anything about your application. It is the only chance you have to communicate anything about your application that is not clear based on what is provided. So it is important that if you have a deficiency, if you have a gap, if you have any kind of blemish that you perceive on your record, that you explain it and you really give some describe the impact of that in your personal statement, because otherwise you leave it up to the reviewer to assess themselves, which often is very negative. We just assume that if you haven't talked about it, then it must be a deficit that you don't want to talk about. And so it leaves a negative impact. So that is a time to describe any challenges that you may face, any issues, and just talk about your journey, especially also if you are a non-traditional student. If you have graduated from medical school and done other things, talk about your journey. Again, it is, as Dr. Lima said, it's a personal statement. Talk about you, and it's the only opportunity to really do that. One other thing, some students try to be special, try to really create a unique statement. What I would say is that if you are a writer, write to your style. And I've had some wonderful personal statements from people who have published books and who really are prolific writers, and you can tell that. And they write wonderful statements that are great to read. I have other students who try to create some kind of unique formatted statement, and it becomes very distracting from what the actual intent of the statement should be. So don't be special just to be special. Don't be, cute just to be cute. Be genuine. Just express yourself in the best way that you can. This is the only opportunity you have to express yourself, and so take it for what that is.
Thank you. That was very valuable and very helpful. Does anyone else want to comment on this personal statement?
The last thing that I would just add, those are all like very good points. The last thing I'd probably add is that I feel that sometimes people get into just summarizing their application in the personal statement. And remember, your application is your application, already has all that information in there. Use that statement to talk about something that's not in the application rather than summarizing all of that. So I think that would be just the last point that I would add, but those were all great points.
I want to add something also quickly. I think something valuable is to not be afraid to talk about something that's outside of medicine that kind of ties in with it. So it kind of brings a perspective into your personality and something different you can offer, like kind of something that makes you stand out, as opposed to, just sticking with medicine. I think it's helpful to go a little bit outside, obviously within professional bounds, but it's okay to talk about like a hobby, for example. That could be something that ties into a certain aspect of the field that you're applying to, for example.
If I may add one last thing, one thing that helped me through the process is start early, obviously, and then read your statement again after a month. Because you might pick up on things when you read it again that you didn't the first time, and you might realize, ooh, that doesn't sound good at all. Let me switch that a little bit and write this in a different way. So if you give yourself a little bit of time to review it and kind of forget about the first time that you read and go through it again, you might pick up different things and it might help you improve your statement overall.
Yeah, I think I wrote like 4 different personal statements before I came to the one that I liked, which is a hybrid of certain ideas and things that I was able to expand on.
So for me, I would say truly that 90% of personal statements don't make any difference. They're fine. It's just there's nothing wrong. They're fine. And then maybe 7% actually are useful because they explain something that I want to know, right? So I read your application. I don't know what's going on. Why was this? Explain it's very helpful. And then the 3% are poorly written, which I have to talk about. So spelling errors, poor grammar, all these things are critically important. And you may say, you know what, how is this about me being a doctor? It speaks to your professionalism, okay? If you are not diligent with your documentation, if you are not diligent with how you prepare your application, it really reflects on what you're going to do as a resident in our program. And so grammar and spelling have to be immaculate on your personal statement. Go through it multiple times, have 10 other people that you trust read it. There cannot be enough people that go through it just for the grammar portion of it. Make sure it's well written, that it reads well. Though that's probably the one thing that could make your personal statement a negative for your application, and that would be a significant one.
Yes, okay. That was all of you. Thank you very much. It was very helpful on the personal statement. So the next topic that I want to talk or discuss is the connections. So if you know someone in a residency program and you are interested in that program, you know, it's important, and especially if they know you, it might be more important. So this, Dr. Khan, this is for you. How would you build a network, or, you know, get to know people in a residency program that you are interested in?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, you know, some of the things that you can do, obviously internal recommendations can be helpful. It can potentially lead to an interview. And I think one of the things that students can do is doing away rotations or electives or observerships. This allows you to have some face time at that institution. You get to see some of the residents, other medical students, some of the faculty, and it's not so much about, you know, showing your knowledge or, you know, how great you are, but just being there and showing your interest, and then putting a face to the name, so that when you do apply, you know, it's often program directors or chief residents may remember you. Another thing that you can do is, and thinking more broadly, is, you know, going to conferences. If you're a student who's taken some time, you know, in between your medical school and training, you know, getting to conferences is an opportunity to network with residents, attendings, program directors. And again, they may remember you, like, hey, I met you at ACP or ACC, whatever conference it is. And that could be kind of your foot in the door to get in an interview at a particular place. And then I've seen, this will be kind of the last thing I've seen people do research fellowships, where if they, for example, went unmatched and now they want to have their foot in the door at an institution, they would do a research fellowship there. And again, that allows you to work with a mentor at that institution who is typically a faculty member there. And that allows you to potentially get a letter of recommendation, as well as, again, get some face time there at that institution.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on this?
I think it's important whenever you're trying to build a network or doing rotations, as Dr. Khan said, it's not only to show your knowledge, but like show them also who you are and how you operate. If people notice from the start that you're willing to work hard, you're efficient, that you're a good team player, that you get along, that you have a good personality to work with, that goes a long way, and not only for residency but for fellowships too. A few of my colleagues, as Dr. Khan mentioned, they got their fellowship spots in a conference. They met their future program director there, and they started talking, and they really liked each other. And during interview, they was more like, hey, nice to see you again. Let's chat a little bit more. So it's something that's very vital, and I think everybody should take the opportunity if they can.
Right. Yes, it can be a network or a connection throughout your career, right? Years after, even you finish your fellowship and when you're a faculty. So, okay. So,
quick note, I think something important to add is that just because you've done a research rotation or done, you know, a rotation there, they have a name for away rotation. It doesn't guarantee it. And that, you know, just because you're there and they know you doesn't mean they liked you. So that's something to keep in mind. Or if you don't have the proper numbers for the place, then, you know, just having connections can only do you so much. It's a plus in certain situations.
Right. Yes, remember to give a good impression. So, okay. So the next topic I would like to ask to Dr. Lima about the letter of recommendation. So asking a letter of recommendation can be intimidating, and getting it on time can be difficult because people are busy. So what would you say about this, Dr. Lima?
I've seen a couple of different approaches to asking about asking for a letter of recommendation. Some people went to their attendee in the beginning of the rotation, and they said, "Hey, this is what I'm interested in. I'm gonna work hard this month, and can you write me a letter of recommendation?" I don't know how I would feel about that. What I did was I basically gave my best in my rotations, and at the end of the rotation, I asked the attendee if they would be comfortable talking about me in a letter of recommendation. It's very important that you also ask, "Hey, do you think you can write me a strong letter of recommendation?" Because if it was a so-so month, maybe you didn't get along with other people or something happened. If they write you a meh type of letter, it might not help you and might even like work against you. So I would say really put your soul into that rotation that you're doing, and at the end, maybe go to the one or two attendees that you got along the best or that you feel more comfortable with, and ask them if they're able to write you a strong letter. In my case specifically, it's funny that you asked me this question. My application was a little bit different. I matched in the match 2017, and I was supposed to apply in the match 2016. But I'm an international medical graduate from Brazil, and I was asked to go to Army duty in 2016. So I had to delay my whole application. And I basically freaked out thinking, what about my letters? Are they going to still remember me a year later? So definitely if there's a gap between the time that you did that rotation and the time that you asked for the letter or applied to MyARAS, shoot them an email from time to time saying how you're doing, try to attend to conferences and talk about those conferences. So people still remember you when they submit those letters to MyARAS. And then one last point that I wanted to mention for me is, I'm not sure if that still works in MyARAS, but I asked, because of the gap that I had, I asked all my letters for the 2016 match, but I didn't send the applications because I was working in Brazil. And then MyARAS carried over all the letters to the 2017 match, which was when I truly applied to the residency programs. So they had that feature at the time that they would carry over all the letters for the next year, just for 1 year. So people should look into that if they have some sort of gap. It might be worth it to just make a MyARAS account for 1 year, get the letters, and have them carry over for the next year.
Yes, that would be helpful.
So
Okay.
I have a couple thoughts on letters. So with the letters, and again, I speak as a pediatric program director. I do know, speaking with other programs, that sometimes the person that writes your letter could matter. So I know that, for example, in some surgical programs, it can be useful to actually have a chairman's letter from the actual chairman of a department. And so you have kind of that, that pedigree at the bottom of your letter, and that can have impact. I will tell you that in primary care, the content of the letter far surpasses who signs the letter. Okay, and in fact, I would say for almost all letters that I write, I disregard who signed the letter. I mean, I assume it's a physician, they kind of describe their background, but what they write in the letter is really what is most important. So with that in mind, when you're trying to identify letter writers, number one, you want it to be someone that you know, respect, and like. It sounds a little frivolous, but if it is someone with whom you have a very kind of cordial relationship, that really builds the interaction that you have, and it allows them to write a little more personally about who you are. The letters are the only opportunity for someone to write something personal about you besides yourself. And again, these are pieces that you want to allow entry into an interview. And so you want to try to give as broad an impression as you can. And so if you have a letter writer that is essentially a form letter, they were on time, they were professional, they were, they did a good job. and that's send the letter, it might as well not exist. There's nothing in there that is useful and contributes to your application. So when you're asking people to write you a letter, don't think about their pedigree. Think about who they are. Is this someone you respect as a physician? Is this someone you respect as a person? Have conversation with them outside of clinical work. Look to them as a mentor, not just as an attending, right? Ask them about their pathway. Have these conversations with them. That will build a background and a foundation from which they can really write a very strong and engaging letter about you. The other piece is that unfortunately, many, many times we see letters that likely are about a very good applicant, but the letter writer is not necessarily the best. And it's a very truncated, very abbreviated, very generic kind of letter. And it's a lost opportunity, I think, for that applicant when they could have picked someone that could have actually said more about them. And so when I talk about picking letter writers, you want to pick someone who, based on their background, based on their scope of work, that likely has written many letters before, right? So you want someone who is in academia, someone who has worked with learners on a regular basis, someone who is an engaged educator for whom education is a big part of their professional identity. These are the people that are going to really know how to write letters because they've read letters. They know what they want to see in those letters. If it is just some random community physician who you had a really good time with, but who has never written a letter before, you might really bond with them, but unfortunately, what they put in the letter may not be as impactful. So you also need someone who has a skill set and experience with writing letters, because they're going to be able to communicate the best information for the people reviewing your application.
Thank you. These comments and answers were really helpful on this topic. Okay, so just as a reminder to our listeners, you can put your questions into the chat box in YouTube, and we'll try to answer them at the last part of this panel. And I will move forward with the next question to Dr. Alek Hawam. So what are the factors that is important while making a list of residency programs to apply?
So everyone's I think it comes down to personal preference, and everyone's personal preference can be different. Out of my experience, I felt like location was super important for me. But that being said, that was my top priority. If you're the kind of person who's interested in a more academic, prestigious type position, that could be the reason that your rank list flows. So if you're more interested in something more academic, or you're interested in something a community hospital based, depending on what's important to you is going to determine how you make your program ranking list, or where to decide to apply even. So something to consider is what's important to you, and what's something you're willing to sacrifice, not sacrifice, and make your list based off of that.
Yes, the way that I did for my residency and fellowship was scoring. Mainly, I think if you're a math person, or if you like tables, because sometimes you have many options, and everything is kind of important, but some are more important than others. So I would just give high score to those areas, and I would score that program according to that, and that gives me a number, and that helped me to draft the first list of the programs. And this worked for me, and some people just go to the program and they really like it, and that's it. You're my top, and that's it. So I guess whatever works for you is gonna be the
something that's absolutely undervalued is how you feel when you're there.
Yeah.
And I think that you want to be able to work in an atmosphere, not necessarily that you can just survive in, but you can thrive in. And everyone's personality needs can be very different. So if this is a program where the residents like to hang out, for example, that could be something that you like, then that's good for you. If you're the kind of person who doesn't necessarily want to hang out with your residents, maybe they're all pre-trained, for example, where everyone respects everyone's personal time off, that could be something important to you. But meshing with the program, their mission statement, who they are, and what they feel like as a group, I think is something very important.
Yes,
I would agree with that. I think when you go, especially to your interviews, every program is going to show you the best side of themselves, and then that's expected and that's fine. I think what's extremely valuable is when you have an opportunity to talk to the residents in that program, either at lunch or kind of off the record, so to speak. And that's where you'll get the true sense of what the program's like and how they've either enjoyed it or not enjoyed it, the things they've liked and disliked. And I think that for me, that was extremely valuable. And I think another thing, just thinking more broadly, is, what are your career goals and what is it that you want to achieve long term, and trying to find the program that aligns with those goals. So if you want to go into a fellowship that requires a lot of research, for example, then maybe you want to think about more about the programs where you'll have opportunities to do research and further build your application, as opposed to programs that maybe don't have that kind of a robust research curriculum.
So speaking specifically to the international students, so I always advise international medical graduates to review their current roster of residents at every program. If the entire roster of residents are American medical graduates, that is likely not a program where you should apply. As an international medical graduate, you do want to apply broadly, to really give you the best chance for a high number of interviews and a strong chance of matching. So you need to have some discretion in terms of where you apply. And if an entire program is filled with American medical graduates, it is likely not a program where you're going to thrive. The reason why I say this is that I have had some experiences told to me by international medical graduates who have been in programs where they feel that they were recruited despite their diversity, not because of their diversity. Okay, so somehow, they've never had an IMG before, but this year somehow you got in, and to really speak about how unusual or atypical you are. And you can really feel different in that environment. And especially in smaller residencies, that cohesion that you feel with your peers is critically important. And you want the diversity of your background and your experience to actually be viewed as an asset, something that you bring to a program, not something that is exempt from your application. And again, we kind of reviewed you despite that part of who you are. So, if you are someone with a diverse background, you want to go to a program that really appreciates diversity, and you can really see that based on the residents, kind of where they're from and where they go.
Yeah, a couple of things that I wanted to add on that topic is, as far as when you're interviewing, getting to know the other residents, seeing the applicants to the program that I'm part with, one of the common mistakes is people tend to interact with the PGY 4s or 3s more when they're interviewing at a place, when in truth, if you match there, you're going to interact with your PGY 2s. The PGY 2s are going to be your seniors at the time. So I always tell the candidates, hey, pay attention to the PGY 2s, because by the time, if you match here or you don't, I'm not going to be here anymore. So they should be the ones you're talking to the most, seeing if you can mingle with them and if you're going to be a good part of this group. And the other thing is, as far as selecting programs, the place is absolutely, the location itself is absolutely a strong factor. As far as weather, am I going to be able to tolerate the weather there? Am I more of an urban person, or do I want to be in a more calm place? Do I want to be somewhere, do I like to travel? Do I want to be somewhere closer to a big airport where I can go to different places? So if you're coming up with a list of programs that are similarly as good, you have to start looking at other things, because you're going to be living at that place for 3 or 4, or if you're a neurosurgery applicant, for 7 years. So you have to match somewhere that you would be happy.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the next question is going to come to Dr. Alec Awam again. So what are the ways to express your interest in a residency program if you're interested in that program?
So something like this varies from program to program. I think doing the audition rotation is a helpful way. Reaching out. So if you're able to get the opportunity for the audition rotation, I think that's a huge plus, because that kind of shows that you're interested and you're being proactive about it. And obviously the expectation is that when you're there, you're going to do a good job there. That being said, that's not the only way. One thing that you can do is you can reach out to the program leadership and express your interest. This is obviously, maybe you didn't get the chance to do the rotation, but this is your top choice. Expressing your interest to the program is important. That being said, I know that I did have, while I was interviewing, program leadership that said, don't send me a thank you letter, don't send me, anything. We're going to make our decision. So don't communicate after the interview. And I think that kind of led into a certain type of transparency with the program. Like, that's the way I interpreted it. And it was basically like a chance to say that we are going to make a decision based off this interview, and your reaching out isn't really going to determine, again, it's a program style thing. So there were other programs that, you send out the thank you letter that was appreciated. So I think knowing that or having that information can be helpful. And again, it's always about filling out the program and making sure, in the end, you're trying to get to what's best for you. And in the end, it's feeling that out and making sure that it works for you.
Okay, thank you.
I have turned thank you cards into a bit of a joke, because I actually addressed this directly during our interview days, because in previous years, there's this obligation, and you have this, this kind of whole packet of pre-addressed thank you cards that you send to all your programs. And so literally there have been seasons where I ended up with hundreds of these tiny little thank you cards. And, I feel bad about immediately throwing away. So they just kind of stack up on my desk, and this huge pile of just garbage that in January I throw all away. And that's honestly what it is, and so I'm very transparent, just as Dr. Kawam said, is that, if you have further questions and have, want to correspond afterwards and discuss certain aspects, more than happy to discuss with you. But the thank you card or the thank you note is just not necessary. And more programs are transparent about this, because again, everything should be about the interview day. It isn't that they don't want to hear from you, it's just not a necessary part. And it's, a mid-interview season, all program directors get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails about a variety of things. We just don't need more of these kind of relatively insignificant correspondences to kind of clog up our inbox, and it just doesn't have any impact. So yeah, so generally speaking, you can certainly ask and get a flavor from the program, kind of what they would like to hear, but generally speaking, it is not something of great importance. The one thing I do need to add, it is there is definitely, you want to be engaged. There definitely is a point where you can kind of push too hard. So I have had applicants who have sent me emails in the double digits. That's too much. And that really kind of diminishes your candidacy within our program. And so I appreciate that some of you may be coming into this process with some challenges, and it may be difficult for to get eyes on your application, and this is why you're advocating for yourself. Redundancy and repetition does not increase your opportunities, and it's just the nature of the process. I get dozens and dozens of random emails from applicants, urging me to review their application, and honestly, most of my time is spent in ARIS. And so those emails, very few get reviewed. And so unfortunately, that's just not a great way to do it. Going back to a previous comment about connections, that can be a useful way. So if you work with an attending who knows someone at an institution or did training at an institution and knows some physicians there, and they're willing to speak up for you, having that physician send an email, make a phone call, a personal request actually can have real impact, because that will be heard. It isn't just a random person emailing me out of nowhere. So those connections can be very useful. So people to speak as your proxy to get some impact with different programs. So certainly use those connections as much as you can.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So we will continue with you, Dr. Charles Kawan. Can you please describe us the attitudes or qualifications of a residency candidate in your eyes? Like what kind of attitude that person should have or should not have?
That is such a broad question.
It is.
So if I think about qualities that I look for in an applicant, actually what I tell students and our residents on their very first day is that the only thing that they need to bring to our program to be successful is ambition. that truly is it. If they have a successful background and have gotten to the point where they, are entering residency, and if they come to our program with the drive to learn, with the drive to find their professional identity, with the drive to succeed professionally, it is up to us to provide them with the tools and the experiences to become successful. So that pathway, the example I give is for some residents, that pathway is linear, right? They're pre-cardiologists on their first day of residency, and then they go to fellowship from one dot to the other. For other residents, it is incredibly torturous and mixed up, and every single year they want to do something different. No matter what that journey is, it is our job to continue to guide them, and it is a resident's job to continue to move forward in a direction, okay? It is a real shame if I'm in a situation where I need to push a resident forward to do more, take more opportunity, show more initiative, all those kinds of things. That is truly a loss and incredibly frustrating for us, because your residency is incredibly short. There's so much that you should and can do during that time, and it's really up to you. So ambition is probably the one most important quality that I look for in an application and during that interview day. In terms of qualities that I do not like, some of it goes, in the category of professionalism or entitlement or these kinds of things. It is important during interview today to be very engaged. All right. And so this goes with everyone that you meet, right? So it certainly is with the people with whom you interview. It absolutely is with the residents, but also the people that you meet in the hallway. It should be absolutely the coordinators and the support people that you meet. We watch, you are always being watched on interview day. Every single moment where you are, people are watching you. And because it isn't, obviously you can put on a strong facade when you're one-on-one with me in my office doing an interview, but how you have a conversation with that co-resident, right? I've heard applicants who they leave my office having done a great interview, and then my coordinator talks about how sarcastic and snarky they were in the hallway talking with the applicant, right? Shows their genuine side. And so it is really important that throughout your interview day, number one, I hope you're just genuine and it's very natural for you to be open and receptive to everybody, but treat every single person that you see that day with the utmost respect. Be very present and attentive throughout the entire day. Because those small things can very easily sabotage your application in an instant, and it definitely has before. So that side of that professionalism, we look for any clues, positive or negative, about that aspect, because that certainly is probably the most important piece, other than the ambition that I spoke of, that really we look for in our residents.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on this?
Oh, I would comment on, those were all great points, Dr. Kwan. I would I just had jotted down a few just general terms that come to mind when thinking of like attitudes and or like qualifications. I mean, certainly thinking of people who are team players, people who have a positive attitude, people who have strong communication skills, people who are able to take and implement feedback. So many of these things you may not get a clue into on the interview day. But I think in your application itself, you want to highlight some of these things. So highlighting that, for example, you were part of a flag football team and that you learned teamwork skills from that, like just expanding on all of these skills. And a lot of these things, actually, when you look, there's this rule in the Canadian medical system called CanMeds, and it's a 7 different rules that, at least in the Canadian medical system, that are highly valued in terms of what makes a good physician. And we may not use this system in the US, but I think we probably do without realizing it. And those 7 things are, A, being a medical expert. So, I mean, we can demonstrate that through our board scores and ultimately how we take care of patients. People who are professional, like Dr. Kwan said, people who are strong communicators, people who are collaborators, people who are leaders, health advocates, and scholars. So I think when you think of really the ultimate physician, you encompass all of those things. And programs may not be looking for all of those things, but many of those qualities, if you can demonstrate those through your application, and then also through your interview, I think you will definitely give yourself a good chance of getting into the program of your choice.
Thanks for those great points.
Can I make one comment? Kind of, it's part of multiple questions about the interview day. So again, this is something that I've observed many times. So I think that there are always a few applicants every year who are really excited that they are able to interview with us. That's fantastic. I'm very happy that they're there. But what that leads to is almost a extreme paranoia about saying the wrong thing on the interview day. And as a result, they become very reticent. They become very withdrawn because they don't want to ask the wrong question. They don't want to say the wrong thing. And they actually are very quiet throughout the day. And my interview with them usually is very flat because they have no questions. They're just happy. They love me, love the program, and that's all they have to say. That is a loss of an interview. And for me, it's essentially like you weren't there because you weren't able to demonstrate anything. When you're interviewing, you want to ask engaged questions, right? Do your research about the program, and you want to highlight strengths that you appreciate, right? So, I noticed that there's a lot about this rehab hospital, this pediatric rehab hospital that you have. Can you tell me more about it and how the residents are able to incorporate their time there? Something that I really have a lot of interest in because of this or that. But also you can ask things like, I noticed that, that your department recently got a new chairman of the Children's Hospital. What impact do you think she has had, and kind of what's her view been on education? Or, I noticed that the Children's Hospital across the city has just had a recent expansion. Do you feel that that's had an impact on your training or on your residents? Right? Do your research about a program, understand what is going on. You can ask somewhat challenging questions so that these are real conflicts. It is important that you frame it in a constructive way. What things are you doing? How is this? How are you kind of managing those kinds of things? You don't want to come across as critical, but you want to ask those engaging questions because that demonstrates to me that you're genuinely interested in our program, and you're able to demonstrate that through your questioning. So please, if you are granted an interview, become a very active part of that day. Be active with the residents. Be active during your interview. Because you really want to maximize that opportunity. And so you have to be able to express yourself during that interview day.
All right, thank you again for those good points. A lot of our listeners are wondering about COVID-19, its impact on the match process, and even the USMLE exams, for example, CS, clinical skills exam. So what's the current status on that, Dr. Kawan?
So there have been very, very strong recommendations by all national bodies, academic bodies, that the interview process this year should be entirely virtual. It has come across as a strong recommendation. It is not a mandate, but through our discussions amongst different programs, as far as I'm aware, pretty much every program with whom I've spoken is going to a virtual interview process. And the Cleveland Clinic across the entire enterprise for all of our programs is entirely virtual this year. And I think that is going to be I'm sure that the large majority of programs will continue that. And again, the idea being that in some of the harder hit areas like New York City, for example, it can be very difficult for students to get the experiences that they need. And also financially, kind of based on what is going on, the impacts across the country have been very variable. And so the opportunity to travel and have time away can be quite challenging. And certainly also, with there being a lot of uncertainty about what will happen with COVID, this summer, fall, and winter, and hospital systems are also pressed, giving residents time away to interview may also be more limited, which also will make virtual interviews much more possible. So my anticipation is that across the country, the interview season this year should be largely virtual. And if you see a program that is not virtual, I would have strong questions about their priorities, in truth. That certainly, though, is extraordinarily challenging, and we're really managing that right now. How do we create a whole holistic experience for our applicants in the same way that we would if they were here? How do we allow them to interact with our residents? Because that socialization is such a critical piece, both for the students and for our residents, to be able to interact with them. How do we do that virtually? How about the facilities? How do we show our facilities and really, show our campus in the best way possible in a virtual fashion? All these things are very, very challenging. And in truth, we're still working on that. As in our Children's Hospital and also with our GME, we're really trying to figure out the best ways to approach this. And I think a lot of programs are really going through that right now. There also has been a strong recommendation by the ACGME that students limit the number of programs to which they apply. based on kind of your pass rate on your steps and those kinds of things. I think for international graduates, they have not put any restrictions. I believe that these were only put forward, if I recall, just for American medical graduates. The idea is that, again, we're trying not to inundate programs with kind of a high number of applicants, but again, it's kind of a good and bad. We certainly like to have a lot of applicants so we can kind of have a broad pool. So that will be kind of a new experience. So in truth, this is a year like no other, and there are a lot of questions and uncertainties, both for students and for programs. We're all trying to figure this out in the best way possible, but you should expect everything to be done virtually this year. That is, I think, going to be the standard across the country. In terms of your steps, there certainly have been a lot of accommodations. So everything is delayed this year. We cannot review, it's I think about a month delayed. Normally we start reviewing applications on September 15th. And I believe it's middle October now. And so it's changing our schedule and all these kinds of things in order to allow time for more AI rotations, time for more letters of recommendations to be provided, and also time to really kind of get your steps done. The other thing is that CS certainly is very much delayed. And so we are not using that as a filter in terms of screening for eligibility for interviews. We can't. Because if you didn't have a chance to do your CS, that is likely not your fault, and that cannot be held against you. And that's, again, a strong recommendation made by the ACGME that the CS should not impact interview assessment. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of the piece that we have right now. I'll say that for our interns this year, June has been a very challenging month trying to get everybody here. Both traveling nationally and traveling internationally. It's been incredibly stressful for our new incoming interns and for us. There's been a lot of support around it, but a lot of questions. And so it is certainly a very challenging time. And I think the biggest issue is that the upcoming 6 to 12 months remain equally uncertain. And so I think that we're trying to do things in as conservative and open a way as possible. But just acknowledge that every program is going through this in a new way. And so there are going to be a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of variability as we all try to figure this out.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And I think it provided some relief to the listeners who are concerned about the exam and its impact on the match. Okay, so now we are going to talk about real life stories, and it's going to be hopefully fun. So this is going to be, this is open to all of our panelists. So we can start with Dr. Charles Kwan and Hassan Khan. If you had any fun, interesting experiences while you are interviewing candidates.
You can go first, Dr. Kwan.
Yeah, so part of the bad ones always are the ones you remember, right? You don't remember the good ones. I mean, I just things like answering your phone during the interview day. I had another resident who took her shoes off during the interview. I mean, just really bizarre kind of behavior. I mean, it just, the big thing, first of all, absolutely, unless. Now, I had one resident whose wife was pregnant, and he actually left the interview day because his wife went into labor. And so he had his phone, but he explained upfront why he had his phone. Okay. If you have a truly emergent reason to have your phone, you can explain that. Otherwise, your phone should never be in sight for the entire interview day. Okay. Just as a general statement, it should not even be visible. Don't even pull it out, even in between. Again, you are always being watched. It's just better to keep it away unless you introduce it as a necessary piece for whatever's going on that day. Okay. Go ahead. I'll keep trying to think of other stories.
I think there's a couple of things that I can think of. One of them was, certainly most people don't have anything that's too interesting on their application. They're just regular med students. They have a few hobbies, and they talk most about that. But I think I did meet one professional skater, so I thought that stood out to me. I thought that was pretty cool. And then like Dr. Kwan was saying, I think the people who I found that the people who are very loud or obnoxious, they leave an impact, and it's usually not positive. So you know, although you want to be engaging, you also don't want to, you know, crack inappropriate jokes or, you know, be, you know, just too out there, I think is the way to put it. So I think those people have stood out. And then the last one person that stood out to me was someone who, they had a lot of research on their application. And like, I'm a research guy, I love research. So I started asking questions about the projects, and the person didn't know anything about any project that I asked them about. So I would say the take home point from that is, like, know what's on your application. If you're going to put something on there, you know, if there's an abstract or if there's some extracurricular, put it there because you actually did it and you know about it and you can talk about it. Because if you can't talk about it, people will remember that and it'll count against you.
That is so important. I talk to students, reread, if you have publication that you participate in, reread them so you know what's in them. Even though it was 4 years ago, if you're putting it down, it is fair fodder. And if there's just one aspect of your application that you forgot that you cannot speak to, it nullifies your entire CV. In my mind, if you can't speak to that thing, how do I know the rest of it is valid? So please, yes, absolutely, review everything that's on your application. But yeah, again, kind of like the personal statements, you know, the efforts to be unique and stand out generally fall flat. I've seen card tricks. I've had applicants pull up their YouTube videos of them performing. You know, these kind of things that, you know, I question how necessary and how well it really fits with them, you know, who they are. You know, you certainly want to be an upbeat and you want to have a personality that fits in with the program for sure. But as as the generation below me often will describe, it's just be careful of being a little too extra. Is a term that my residents often describe these residents as. So be true to who you are, but don't feel like you need to really stand out. Don't force yourself to stand out in that situation.
Okay, how about our other two panelists? Do you guys have any personal experience?
So interesting story. On the both of the sides of the interview process. When I was interviewing, I was staying with a friend. I used her place kind of as a my home, and then fortunately I was in Atlanta, so a big airport, access to everywhere, and so from there I went to multiple places, and I didn't really plan very well. The order of my interviews, I started out great flying Delta, and at the end I was taking Greyhound for 16 hours. So I would say for the people who are interviewing, like, try to organize your interview dates in a way that makes sense and you don't waste a lot of money. And Megabus is definitely better than Greyhound if you're going to take that route. That's all I have to say about that. And as far as being on the other side of the interview panel, we certainly had a few interesting situations. The most recent one that I can remember is there was this candidate that joined us for the dinner the night before. And on the first 5 minutes, it was very clear that they weren't going to mingle well with the other group of residents. They portrayed themselves, they behaved in a very grand way, in a very fancy way. And our group of residents is very, very chill and very down to earth. And I guess at 30 minutes in the dinner, they just got up and stormed out of the restaurant without saying a single word to everyone. And I was like, oh my God, are they gonna even come to the interview tomorrow? And they showed up, and they were the most pleasant people ever to the attendings. And that didn't really work. We all remember what they did the night before, and we went to our program director and said, hey, that's a big no-no. Just the behavior was not very cool. But I was thinking back, it was kind of a funny situation, the way they got up and stormed out. Yeah.
One other thing I would say is that there are a lot of very extensive rules about the interview process and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So if you're ever asked a question about which, if you have any discomfort answering, you have every right not to answer. It can feel like sometimes you're in a place where you can't refuse, but you absolutely should. And certainly if it is something that you find is more offensive, it is something that really should be reported. There's a process through NRMP and ARIS that if you have any kind of, if you feel any discrimination during interview day, again, gender, race, sexual orientation, anything like that, even like your family or, you know, the fact that you have a family or anything to that extent, you know, if someone, you know, if someone notices if you're pregnant, for example, and someone asks about, you know, how are you going to manage that during your intern year, that is absolutely inappropriate, right? That should never be asked. You should never feel that your family or your family planner or anything should have any impact in your candidacy. And so these are things that are absolutely not tolerated. And there's actually a reporting process if you face any of those types of things that you feel in any way discriminatory.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was reminded of my own interview experience, actually. And Dr. Kwan, you can comment on this as a program director afterwards, whether you think it's something that should be done or should not be done. But I remember one program put me on the spot and asked me to like basically go through a case and just like, you know, as we say, pimp me on the spot, like ask me question after question and go through it. I don't know if that's liked or disliked. I know it was extremely stressful for me and pretty uncomfortable. And ultimately I ended up ranking that program pretty low. So I don't know, Dr. Kwan, what are your thoughts on having your candidates go through those kind of stressful situations?
You know, it's hard to speak to that because there are a lot of variables. Sometimes that could be just that one attending, right? So a lot of programs bring in a variety of faculty that they may not have coached as well. And so you can go through an interview day, have 3 wonderful interviews and one that was just bizarre or aggressive or offensive. And then how do you really assess that? And that is a shame for the program, but that can, you know, that may not reflect on the entire program. But the other piece about, you know, kind of pimping during the interview day is that you have to think about how that reflects on the program, right? And what kind of learning environment do they actually create for their residents, right? Is it one that is very aggressive? If it is one that is very kind of hierarchical you know, there's always a feeling of intimidation throughout the education. You know, is that really an aspect to the interaction between attendings and residents? You know, and so if I were to face that, I would question and hopefully get from residents also a sense of, is this really how the attendings approach, you know, their education? You know, is it really more of a, almost like you feel like you're being vetted or weeded out? You know, are you going to make it or are you not? You know, that kind of, does that translate in terms of how the training is? You know, I tell our residents that, or tell students also, when you look for a program, you should find somewhere where you and your education are highly valued. You as a person and your education are valued as in that hospital and with that program. And, you know, we talk a lot about a supportive learning environment. And so I always question those kind of tactics during an interview day, because I think sometimes that can translate to a more aggressive learning environment if that is ubiquitous. Again, if that's not just one attending, but if that's more a ubiquitous piece, then that could be a reflection of the program, which is then your prerogative about whether that's a scenario where you might thrive.
I haven't interviewed at a place where they quote unquote pimp you, but I've definitely heard about it. So coming from a pathology background, I've heard that there are programs out there who will put you under, you know, on the spot on, you know, ask you to look at something under the microscope. And it's interesting because your knowledge, generally in today's day and age, pathology is not something extensively taught in medical school. So it's a little bit unfair because at that point, you know, what are you trying to do? Like, obviously, unless you've been pre-trained, that's a different question. I don't know what the intent of doing that to residents is. Is it, can you give me the answer? Meaning like, your education is not being valued here and you should know everything on your own. That could be one perspective. Or the other perspective is we want to see how you work under pressure, or, you know, there's different questions they could be answering with something like that. Obviously I wouldn't be able to tell you which one it is because everywhere is different. But if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, or, you know, maybe that's not a program for you. And I think as an applicant, you should look for, you know, don't just, you know, look for a good fit. And it sounds cliche, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're going to not just survive, but thrive in the place. And that's really important, because if you don't get along with people, or you don't like the way the system works, or, you know, any other factor that everyone's factors are different, then maybe that's not the greatest place for you. As far as like interesting experiences go, I've definitely heard of the taking off the shoes thing. I've definitely heard of or I've actually like met applicants who are very excited and they try to keep a conversation going to the point where it's a little annoying. It's like, oh man, one question I get is, oh, you're from that country, like originally, like ethnically. And it's like, yes. Oh yeah. And my travel experiences. And it kind of doesn't let the other applicants ask more relevant questions. And I think the applicant could be just trying to be nice and it's just coming off, as Dr. Kwan said, extra. It's annoying. So there needs to be a professional boundary. Like it's important to be yourself, but it also is important to observe a professional boundary on that day.
Thank you for sharing all of those experiences. That was really great. So now we can answer some of the questions that was asked by our listeners. So again, our listeners can put their questions into the chat box and we will try to address them as much as we can. So,
how many listeners are there?
I'm sorry?
How many listeners do we have? I'm just curious.
Actually, I don't have the link at this point to the YouTube, but let me, our IT is right now and I will report that. So let's see. I'm also wondering about that. So IT is now, and I will report that. So total 250. 250 but concurrent viewers are 60 right now. So and this will be watched later on, and I think it will have this will be in our YouTube channel, and people will be watching this over the years. So that's really great. Okay, so one of our listeners asked this question, Dr. Khan, says, you brought up a great point about the importance of away rotations. Unfortunately, most of them have been canceled and because of COVID-19. Can you please touch base on this? And is there any other ways to do those rotations?
I think, COVID-19 is obviously such a unique and difficult, challenging time that we're dealing with. I think at least at the University of Buffalo, where I'm currently a chief resident, our students are just getting back into the rotations next week. So, what does that mean for external aways and then observerships? I think the reality at most institutions would be that they wouldn't be a priority, especially right now. And then also with the restrictions with travel and limiting exposures, I think that this cycle, most people will probably miss out on many opportunities for away rotations. Now, I think that will vary from institution to institution, state to state. Certain states are almost back to business as usual. So there might be opportunities there. But I know, for example, in New York State, where I've had my experience, I don't personally see many observerships happening for the next year or so until we know what things look like moving forward. And I think that programs will be understanding of that. Like Dr. Kwan was kind of saying, I think these are uncharted, territories, and, programs will be understanding that you may not have had the opportunity to come out and do those away rotations. And I think that they'll focus on other things in your application to give people a fair chance. But we won't know until the dust settles and what things look like next year, I think so.
About telemedicine rotations, and this is open for everyone, how is it gonna be impacting this match process? And also, does it help? That was other question.
So we're pretty much in the same situation as Buffalo is. Our students started on June 1st, so not too much sooner. And we are currently only supporting AI rotations for our local medical schools, and that's it. I'm pretty sure that the observer programs right now is completely shut down still. So, and we have no idea what's going to change. So, and I think it's going to be pretty common across the country. You're going to find that everywhere. In terms of telemedicine, that's an interesting question. I will say that we have not actually created any kind of external telemedicine type of experience for, like an outside rotator. It took us a while to really figure out how to get our medical students and residents into telemedicine as we kind of embrace the virtual environment once COVID hit. I'm not aware. There may be some programs that might be a little bit more proactive and be able to create some kind of telemedicine experience for a rotator. If you see that opportunity, I would absolutely pursue it. Virtual healthcare is very much is now mainstream care. And there can be a lot of very functional type of education and interaction that you have if that is something that a program were to provide. We are not doing anything like that at this moment. I think with everything going on, it probably is not something we're going to create just because of the challenge and the complexity around that. We certainly, as most hospitals are, we're really trying to reopen and bring more people back in. So the virtual practice is now more sporadic. And so I think it'd be difficult for an outside rotator to create an entirely virtual kind of telehealth experience. I don't see that as a viable option for rotation necessarily, but again, there may be some exceptions across the country.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to think of a way that would work. And at least in my institution, there's like we use our medical record software to do the telemedicine because of HIPAA. So it's not FaceTime or Zoom or Skype. It's the same medical record system that the patient connects through their app and we connect through the computer in the hospital. So I'm trying to think of a way that a rotation could be done, and it's very hard, especially if somebody's doing that on another state or another country because of HIPAA and privacy, PHI privacy. I don't see that happening easily, but yeah, who knows? There might be an exception out there.
The other challenge, every single hospital system in the US is facing significant financial losses due to COVID. Every single hospital system. And so budgetary restrictions are prevalent everywhere. Many hospital systems are reducing pay or cutting positions. Thankfully, the ACGME has really pushed against, programs cannot eliminate trainees that are already there. But in terms of creating new programs like this or whatnot, I would find it hard to believe that any hospital system would really put any kind of effort or resource into something new, as they're just trying to get back to some kind of baseline right now. We're all suffering from this. And so there's a lot of limitations in terms of really what we're able to do. So I doubt those new types of experiences are going to be created.
Another question is, people who are introvert may seem not as engaged during the interviews. So what would be your recommendations, or do you have any tips for them? This is just their personality, and that's how they approach to everything.
So I am an introvert also, and how I assess that is that when I am in this kind of setting, I think an extrovert gains energy from being in this setting, and for me, it drains me when I have in this setting. And I'm very happy to do this for sure. But I feel like I'm giving to this experience, and that's my role as an introvert. I think you have to think about who you are as a physician. Being an introvert, it is still necessary to engage and interact with people, with teams. As a physician, you are a team leader, whether it's on a ward team, a department, a practice. And so there are qualities of leadership that you really must establish. And so that goes beyond whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. So even if you're an introvert, you have to find a way to engage with populations. You certainly don't need to be the loudest voice, and it's probably best for you not to be the loudest voice at a dinner or at a kind of a social environment, but you still need to find ways to make your presence known. Being active listener, ask questions. If people, ask a question of you, you want to give a thoughtful answer. And yes, it may push you a little bit out of your comfort zone. It may take some energy to do so, but it is necessary. And in truth, these are skills that are necessary for you as a physician. These go beyond just your interview day. And so you should be capable of establishing that kind of engagement and interaction. So I can't really accept the answer that I'm an introvert, so I just didn't say anything that day. Because if that's how you are and how you care for patients, how you communicate with patients, you're going to have issues. And that, that may not be, if you are to that degree, you probably would not be perceived as someone that would thrive in, especially kind of a primary care environment. So you do need to push yourself a little bit in those scenarios. But again, these are skill sets for you as a physician, not just an applicant to a residency.
Okay, another question is, what do you recommend to people who did not match in their first year or second year or third year?
I mean, I think as a program director, Dr. Kwan can probably comment on that a lot better than myself. But I mean, I can just, knowing friends and colleagues who have kind of gone through that, my impression at least is that you really have to do things to improve your application, I think, from year to year, and not fall in the trap of really applying with the same application that you had the year before. So like, what have you done to really improve? I think for certain people, there are some major like rate limiting factors, which is typically related to like board scores, I think, or failing step exams, things of that nature. And Dr. Kwan can maybe provide more insight. I don't know how you get over those humps. That seems like a pretty big hump to get over. But my initial thought about that is just trying to expand your application with other things in between the gap that you have between each year.
Yeah, I suspected this would come up, and this is probably the toughest question. And there certainly may be cohorts of people listening to this, and that is their situation. I have met with many young professionals who are in this scenario, and my advice is I'm very, very honest with them. The reality is that there are thousands more international medical graduate applicants than there are residency spots. And so there will always be a large cohort of IMGs that do not match. It's just numbers. That's the reality. And probably the greatest single factor that diminishes your application as an IMG resident applicant is the time between the last time you were clinically active. Okay, and I appreciate that. Again, I've heard many, many stories, traveling, family issues, refugee status, all these kinds of things that can certainly cause gaps that are really out of your control. And I appreciate that. But it is true that it is a hurdle that you really cannot overcome. The only way to overcome that is to return to the country where you did your medical school training, because that's really the only place where you can practice clinically. And if that is an option, and you're invested in the long term, that actually is something that I would be very quick to support. If you could actually go and participate in a training program for 1 to 3 years or something like that, that actually is a very good way to bolster your application, because it demonstrates that you are clinically active. And for residency programs, remember, residency is about clinical competence. Research is important, but it is not about research proficiency. It is about clinical competence. That's what residency is about. And so you need to demonstrate your skills to be clinically competent. And if you have not touched a patient, had a patient encounter in 5, 6, 7 years, your capacity to get on board and become clinically competent would be viewed as challenging. And that is usually why applications with that kind of gap are not really reviewed. So what is the reality? Also, the reality is that every year that you don't match, your chance of matching continues to decrease. So every year that you don't match, it is the inevitable question when someone reviews your application about why didn't you match? And this goes for AMGs also. There are American medical students who don't match and they come back again. And I have the highest level of scrutiny, like what went wrong? And they need to provide a clear explanation that is plausible and that is constructive in terms of how they've improved themselves, in terms for me to really consider them, because it is a significant blemish if you don't match. It's just the reality. You forgive me, it's like you were not wanted, but for some reason, programs viewed you as a candidate that they would not match, and there must have been a reason. And so it is a difficult thing to overcome. And so every year that you go unmatched it makes it more of a challenge, which is why I say that no matter where you are, the first year that you enter into the match, you need to invest all of your resources and do everything you can to be sure that you make the greatest chance of matching that first year. Don't go in partially, don't test the waters for the first time, because if you do not match, that will forever be part of your application. And so no matter where you are, you want to apply broadly into everywhere that you can, use every connection that you can to do everything you can to be sure that you match. Now, if you're further along and again, there are barriers, whether it's sports scores or significant gaps, and there are these deficiencies that are part of your application, you need to consider, first of all, you need to consider the specialty in which you are matching. Certainly, there are some specialties that have more open positions, and so your chance of matching into those is more favorable versus the more competitive specialties where your chances are going to be much less to match, and that is something you need to consider. In terms of what you can do to bolster your application, cut and dry, there's not a huge amount that you can do. Getting an MPH, doing research, doing observerships, all these are pretty thin experiences, and it's going to be very clear to the the program directors that this is just a way to continue to fill your gap. I do think it's better than nothing, right? So if you have nothing on your CV from 2017 to 2020, you have absolutely nothing written on your CV, that is going to be very difficult to overcome. If you're doing observerships, if you volunteer at this clinic, if you're doing community outreach and you've got an MPH and you fill that time, that is going to be much, much stronger. So you want to engage in something during that time, have something on your CV that shows that you have a drive to improve yourself in some way. So that is really, really important that you're somehow engaged in your ongoing residency search process. But the reality is that there will forever be a significant cohort of international physicians who are unable to identify residency. That is the reality. And so, I talk to applicants, apply, do the best that you can. You need to be transparent about alternative pathways, about exactly, what role can you find within healthcare that really aligns with what you want to do. Again, I never try to sugarcoat my advice. I want everyone to find the pathway that makes the best sense for them. But the numbers are that not every single international physician will be able to find a residency spot. That is just the reality. And so these are the pieces of advice that I can give to optimize your chances.
All right, thank you very much. I think you also covered the question about applying more than one specialty. So
let me make a comment about that.
Yeah.
You can do that. Do not let programs know. All right. If I see an applicant that applies to medicine and pediatrics, I don't want them to come to my program and decide, you know what, I wish I was in medicine. And that is what every single program will think, that I was a second choice. And if you're there and you're working hard and you're not happy, like, oh, I wish I was somewhere else, or I wish I'd done something else. Okay. So while it may be necessary, for example, I do know some IMGs, they apply to pediatrics, they also apply to family practice. Okay. Because again, they want to try to optimize their chance of matching into a program. You want to be present in the moment, but you also, it doesn't, there's really no way to to package that approach that makes sense for that program, right? It's like, I'll do anything. Well, no, we want you to be passionate about pediatrics, right? That's what we're here to train you to be successful and be, have an impact in the field of pediatrics, not just enter pediatrics as an afterthought because it's something you could get into. So it is a viable and something necessary to apply to multiple specialties, but you want to be clear with your letter writers. You want to be clear in your personal statement that there is no discrepancy, because I've seen letter writers that have had errors in terms of where they are. And sometimes it is revealed that, you know what, I'm applying for two fields because I'm just not sure. And I will tell you that that's not going to fly. Because residency is hard and you need to be passionate about it. And if you're having second guess about what you want to do, residency is not going to be the place for you. So you can do it, but you need to be focused on where you are and what you're doing, and create a presentation that this is the only thing that you want to do.
Yeah,
and
about
I know
that.
This is forever recorded and for life, but it's just a reality. You can't tell a program that you're mixed specialties. It just doesn't carry over well.
And we had an experience of a candidate that applied to neurosurgery and neurology in our hospital. And that's not a very good idea. Obviously neurosurgery is a more competitive subspecialty. So it's very clear that you're applying to neurology as the second best thing. And in the same hospital, it's even worse. It's basically the same departments, the neuroscience department. So of course, everybody knew that was going on, and it was brought up during interview, and the poor guy had no answer to that. So that's a big no-no. If you're gonna do that, at least apply to different subspecialties in different institutions. Do not apply to to different programs in the same hospital. That's because people are going to find out. Everybody knows each other.
Okay, I don't see any other questions sent by our IT department. So, and we have 2 minutes left. So I think we are coming to the end. So before that, I really appreciate answering all of those tough questions and being very open and sincere. So this will end our panel, and we'll hopefully see you guys at another time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Take
for
care,
having
guys.
me.
You.